Wealthy millionaire caught with mistress at the hospital, pregnant wife forced to face the truth. Stolen glances, whispered phone calls, and a love that seemed unbreakable until one fateful evening. Naomi Turner, 7 months pregnant and already overwhelmed by her millionaire husband's frenetic lifestyle, never imagined she'd learn the truth in a place meant for healing, the hospital. But when an urgent call reveals Jonathan Turner has been admitted following a mysterious accident, Naomi races to his side only to discover he's not alone. A beautiful stranger hovers by his bed, signaling secrets Naomi can no longer ignore. Brace yourself for a breathtaking saga of betrayal, heartbreak, and raw courage, where the boundaries of love and loyalty stretch beyond measure. Naomi Turner woke that morning to the soft patter of rain against her bedroom window. She pressed a gentle hand to her swollen belly, where her baby, her first child, moved restlessly. At 30 weeks pregnant, each kick was a tangible reminder of the fragile miracle growing inside her. The ache in her lower back had become as familiar as her own heartbeat, and she sighed as she rolled over to find the other side of the bed empty. It was no surprise that Jonathan Turner had already left. Her husband never neglected his ambitious schedule, conference calls before dawn, business meetings through lunch, and power dinners that stretched late into the evening. He was a self-made millionaire, once just a savvy, charming entrepreneur from a modest background, now courted by the city's most prestigious investors. Naomi had fallen in love with that drive, that insatiable thirst for success, though it sometimes left her lonely. Their home, an expansive, modern estate in the affluent Brookhaven neighborhood, seemed eerily quiet in Jonathan's absence. Morning light filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows as Naomi shuffled to the kitchen. She found a note taped to the fridge, in Jonathan's hurried scrawl, meeting with Garrett Reynolds at 6 a.m. Should be back by noon. Get some rest, love you. Naomi's lips curved into a small, sad smile. The final words, love you, offered a distant comfort. She clung to the idea that he still cared, despite his mounting absences. But lately, a subtle tension had settled between them. Naomi felt it in the hush that followed Jonathan's late-night phone calls, in the way his expressions clouded whenever she asked about specific deals or certain new clients. She tried to banish any suspicions that Jonathan might be hiding something. After all, they were about to welcome a child into the world. Despite the occasional shadow in his gaze, Jonathan had never given her concrete reason to doubt him until, perhaps, now. Still, she resolved to push away the uneasy thoughts. She had an appointment with her obgyn, Dr. Robert Hall, later that day and needed to stay calm. Stress wasn't good for the baby. Naomi arrived at Dr. Hall's office just before noon. She settled into the waiting room with a magazine on her lap, but found herself rereading the same sentence over and over. Anxiety churned in her stomach as she wondered whether Jonathan would make it in time. He had promised to join her for the ultrasound, another vow that might end up broken by the demands of his empire. 40 minutes later, Dr. Hall's nurse called Naomi's name. She was escorted into an examination room and assisted onto the table. The warm ultrasound gel spread across her belly, and she stared at the black and white monitor, waiting to see the faint flicker of her baby's heartbeat. Just as Dr. Hall pointed out the healthy measurements, the door eased open. Jonathan slipped in, breathless, hair slightly disheveled. His grey suit looked immaculate, but the weariness around his eyes betrayed long hours. "I'm so sorry I'm late," he murmured, taking Naomi's hand. Traffic was a nightmare. Naomi gave his fingers a grateful squeeze, relief overshadowing the flicker of hurt that he had almost missed the appointment. She guided his attention to the screen. There, their child due in about 10 weeks kicked and wriggled. "Everything looks good," Dr. Hall said, removing the probe. "Strong heart, normal growth. Naomi, I'll see you in 2 weeks for a routine follow-up. Make sure you're getting enough rest. Naomi tried not to dwell on the fact that rest rarely found her these days. She was either pacing alone in that big, empty house or waiting for Jonathan to come home. She followed Jonathan out of the building, relieved to have him by her side, at least for a moment. In the car, Jonathan fiddled with his phone, answering texts and checking emails. As Naomi watched him from the passenger seat, an emotion close to resentment flared. Did he even realize how distant he had become? He glanced at her. "You look worried." "I'm fine," she lied. Then, more softly, "I just need us. I need support. Pregnancy isn't easy." His features softened, and for a fleeting moment she saw the Jonathan she'd fallen in love with, a man of warmth and reassurance. "I know. I promise things will slow down soon." She nodded, but deep down she wondered if he believed his own words. That evening, Naomi settled into the den while Jonathan wrapped up another conference call. She sipped chamomile tea, flipping channels absently when her phone buzzed. It was her close friend, Carolina Mitchell. They'd grown up together in a small Midwestern town and relied on each other's counsel through life's ups and downs. "Naomi," Carolina's voice crackled with concern. "I heard a rumor. Something about Jonathan and a new investor, someone named Melissa Brighton. She's supposedly glamorous and has been seen hanging around your husband at events. Thought you should know. My friend in public relations told me." Naomi's pulse skittered, her free hand pressed against her belly as though protecting the baby from her roiling anxiety. "Melissa. I've never heard of her. Maybe it's just business. But you know how tabloids are," Carolina said, her tone meant to comfort. "Don't assume the worst. I only mention it because I don't want you to be blindsided. People talk." "Thank you for letting me know," Naomi managed. After they hung up, she stared into the darkness of the den. Jonathan had never mentioned a Melissa. The name hammered in her mind like a warning bell. Moments later, Jonathan entered the den, phone still in hand. He saw the worry in Naomi's eyes and offered a tentative smile. "Everything okay?" She debated whether to confront him. The tension in her chest screamed for answers. But fear, along with the knowledge that a direct confrontation might escalate into an argument, held her back. She didn't have solid proof of anything yet. Naomi forced a nod. "Just tired." He leaned in and pressed a light kiss to her forehead. "I'll be late tomorrow. Garrett wants me at some dinner with new partners, but I'll try to wrap it up early." Naomi's gut churned. She nodded again, swallowing the knot in her throat. As Jonathan headed upstairs, she wondered if those new partners included the mysterious Melissa Brighton. The day that upended Naomi's life started out normal enough. She was in the middle of baking chocolate chip cookies, her latest attempt at stress relief, when the phone rang, its shrill tone slicing through the quiet. "Hello?" she answered, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. A brisk voice crackled on the other end. "Mrs. Naomi Turner?" "Yes, this is she. This is Midtown General Hospital. Your husband, Jonathan Turner, has been admitted. We need you to come as soon as possible." Time seemed to slow. The spatula slipped from her grip, landing with a dull thud on the kitchen floor. "What happened? Is he okay?" "He's stable, but there was a car accident. Doctors are running tests. Please come right away." Naomi's heart hammered against her rib cage. Urgent adrenaline coursed through her veins, even as the weight of her pregnancy made every movement more cumbersome. She grabbed her purse, keys, and rushed out. A swirl of terror, confusion, and worry overwhelmed her. Was Jonathan gravely hurt? Would he be okay? Her mind also flickered to the possibility that he had not been alone. Who else might be in that car? She shoved the thought aside, refusing to let panic paralyze her. At Midtown General, Naomi dashed through automatic doors, scanning the bustling lobby for any sign of direction. A receptionist told her Jonathan was on the 4th floor, and Naomi wasted no time. The elevator ride felt eternal. She pressed a trembling hand to her belly, silently begging the baby to hold tight while she tried to hold herself together. Once the door slid open, she followed the signs to the emergency corridor. A nurse intercepted her. "Miss Turner, right this way." Naomi's gaze darted around as they hurried past rows of rooms. She glimpsed anxious families, doctors in scrubs. Hospitals were spaces of heartbreak, hope, and raw reality. Her stomach twisted in fear. They arrived at a private waiting area, separated from the public lounge by a glass door. The nurse gestured inside. "You can have a seat. Dr. Owen Barnes will speak with you shortly." Before Naomi could protest, the nurse vanished, leaving her alone in that quiet, sterile space. She sank onto a vinyl couch, knees shaking. She tried Jonathan's cell phone, but there was no answer. She texted Carolina, "John in accident. At Midtown General, scared. Minutes crawled like hours." Then the door swung open. A tall man in a white coat entered, stethoscope looped around his neck. "Miss Turner, I'm Dr. Barnes. Please sit." She swallowed. "How's my husband?" "He's stable. It appears he suffered a head laceration and possible bruised ribs. We're doing scans to ensure there's no internal bleeding. He's conscious but in some pain." Naomi exhaled a tremulous breath. "Can I see him?" "Soon," Dr. Barnes answered gently. He paused, then continued. "There's another individual involved. She's also being treated." A chill swept Naomi. "Another? Who?" "Her name is Melissa Brighton. She was in the passenger seat. She appears to have a fractured arm and some contusions. She'll be admitted overnight as well." Naomi's vision blurred. The name burned like acid. Melissa Brighton, the same woman rumored to be spending time with Jonathan. A swirl of betrayal mingled with her worry. Dr. Barnes hesitated. "I'm not sure of their connection, but I wanted to let you know she's stable. We're keeping her in a nearby wing." Naomi's world spun. For a moment, she thought she might faint. She was about to demand answers, but Dr. Barnes, sensing her shock, gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Take a moment, Mrs. Turner. I'll bring you to your husband once they've finished evaluating him." Left alone again, Naomi pressed her palms to her eyes, tears already escaping. Jonathan had been in a car accident with Melissa Brighton, the woman she'd begun to suspect. Her heart pounded with a sickening dread. How could he do this to her? And now, with the baby on the way. At last, a nurse escorted Naomi to a curtained-off area where Jonathan lay in a hospital bed. Machines beeped steadily, and the faint smell of antiseptics tinged the air. Jonathan's dark hair fell limp across his forehead, a bandage wrapped around it. He winced when he saw her. "Naomi," he croaked, voice heavy with pain. "Thank God you're here." She approached cautiously, tears tracking down her cheeks. "Are you all right?" "Just bruises. A gash on my head." They're worried about a concussion. He tried to push himself upright, but winced again. She hovered a moment, uncertain whether to touch him. Concern warred with anger. "Jonathan, they said you weren't alone." His eyes flickered with guilt. "Naomi, I can explain." "Then explain," she demanded, voice quivering. "Why is Melissa Brighton here? Why was she in your car?" He swallowed, his gaze darting away as if searching for an exit. "We were finishing a meeting. I offered her a ride to her hotel. That's all." His words rang hollow. Naomi couldn't ignore the tension behind them, the unspoken truth. "Then why didn't you ever mention her name before?" She fought to keep her voice low, to avoid attracting the entire hospital staff. Jonathan's face paled. He exhaled shakily. "It's complicated. She's an investor. We've been working closely. We've had personal involvement too." The confession hit Naomi like a punch to the gut. All air seemed to vanish from the room. Her worst fear, the swirling suspicions, had just been confirmed. She pressed a hand to her mouth as tears slipped free. The hospital's fluorescent lights felt blinding. The beep of machines hammered her ears. "How could you?" she whispered, voice fracturing. "I'm pregnant with your child, Jonathan. I never wanted this to happen." He reached for her hand, but she jerked away. "Naomi, please." A wave of dizzy fury washed over her. She couldn't stand the sight of his bandaged face, the guilt in his eyes. She spun around and fled the room, unable to bear another second in his presence. Nurses glanced up as she stumbled back into the corridor, tears streaming, her arms wrapped protectively around her belly. She needed air, needed space. Half blinded by emotion, Naomi found herself near the adjacent wing, where she saw a chart labeled with Melissa Brighton's name outside a private room. Her heart clenched. The woman behind that door had stolen her husband's loyalty, stolen months of her life in secrecy. But confronting her in this moment felt like stepping into fire. She forced herself to breathe. Not here, not now. She turned her back on the door and hurried out of the wing, tears refusing to stop. The cracks in her marriage had exploded into canyons of betrayal. Naomi wandered into a quiet waiting lounge. She sank into a chair, breathing hard. Through teary eyes, she texted Carolina with trembling fingers. "He's with her. I'm at the hospital." He lied. "Help." A few minutes later, Carolina called. "I'm on my way. Just stay strong, Naomi. You don't have to deal with this alone." While waiting, Naomi's thoughts churned. How could Jonathan do this to her? She recalled all the cancelled dinners, the rushed texts, the phone calls he took behind closed doors. It all led to this. She felt an urge to scream, but the cold sterility of the hospital forced her to swallow her cries. Eventually she heard a gasp. Looking up, she saw Carolina, breathless, eyes full of sympathy. Naomi sprang up and collapsed into her friend's arms, sobbing. "He admitted it," she choked. "He's been seeing that woman." Carolina smoothed Naomi's hair, guiding her back into the chair. "I'm so sorry. We need to get you out of here. You need rest. Come on, I'll take you home." Naomi shook her head. I need to confront him again. I need answers. Then maybe I can leave." Carolina nodded, though apprehension pinched her features. "All right, I'll come with you, but are you sure you're up for it?" Naomi's jaw set. "I have to be." She braced herself, letting Carolina steady her by the elbow. Together, they returned to Jonathan's section. A nurse gave them a concerned glance, but stepped aside. Inside the room, Jonathan looked marginally better, though his face was etched with guilt. He opened his mouth to speak, but Naomi thrust up a hand, stopping him. "I'm not here for apologies," she said, forcing her voice to remain steady. "I just want to know how long it's been going on and why you did it." Carolina crossed her arms at Naomi's side, silently supporting her. Jonathan's throat bobbed. 6 months. Since I started negotiating with her firm. He winced, whether from physical pain or shame. Naomi couldn't tell. It wasn't supposed to become what it became. "I was stressed, felt I was losing you, but that's no excuse." Naomi let out a bitter laugh, tears gathering again. "Losing me? I've been right here, pregnant with your child, waiting for you to come home at night. You had a choice." He reached for her hand again, but she stepped backward. She wouldn't let him cling to her with false remorse. "I need time," she managed. I can't do this right now." Jonathan's eyes glistened. "I understand. Just please take care of yourself and our baby." Naomi couldn't speak. She turned sharply and left, Carolina trailing behind. Every step down the corridor felt like stepping away from the life she thought she had. For the first time, she couldn't picture tomorrow. Though Naomi tried to resist, the pull of curiosity proved too strong. On her way out, she asked Carolina to wait near the elevators while she took a detour. She stopped at the room bearing the name Melissa Brighton. The door was partially closed. Through the gap, Naomi caught sight of a slender brunette with a bandaged arm, half reclined on the hospital bed. Despite the bruises on her forehead and the fourth line in her arm, she still radiated a certain poised beauty. Naomi's breath hitched. She could turn and walk away, preserve her dignity. Yet something inside her insisted on seeing the woman who had upended her life. Heart pounding, she gently pushed the door open. Melissa looked up, alarm flickering in her dark eyes. A moment of recognition passed between them, two strangers bound by betrayal. Melissa's expression wavered, torn between shame and defiance. "You're Naomi," she said quietly, her voice brittle. "Jonathan's wife." Naomi's nails bit into her palms. "Yes, I see you already know who I am." Silence expanded, thick with tension. Melissa pressed her lips together, seemingly searching for words. "I'm sorry," she said at last, voice trembling. "I never meant for this to happen. We never expected the accident." Naomi felt a surge of anger so hot it brought a tremor to her voice. "You're sorry because of the accident, or because you slept with my husband?" Melissa's face flushed. "Both. I didn't mean to hurt you." That empty phrase rattled Naomi's composure. She'd heard this all before, from countless tales of affairs. The unspoken, "it just happened," was never enough to justify the pain inflicted. "I don't care about your feelings," Naomi said, voice shaking with rage. "I'm pregnant." "You knew he was married. That didn't stop you." Melissa's eyes brimmed with tears. "One can't undo it. But please know, Jonathan, he never said he wanted to leave you. I was there for him when—" Naomi let out a bitter laugh. "Stop. Don't cast yourself as some sympathetic confidant. If you truly felt guilt, you would have walked away months ago." Melissa looked down at her bandaged arm, speechless. Naomi's eyes burned. She'd gleaned all she needed. This woman was no innocent victim. Without another word, Naomi turned and left, refusing to look back. The confrontation left her shaking. She returned to Carolina, who, seeing her expression, pressed the elevator button without question. As the doors slid closed, Naomi let out a shuddering sigh, tears burning hot. Her world had crumbled in a single day. Carolina insisted that Naomi stay with her for the night. Naomi agreed, dreading the solitude of the Turner estate. It was a fortress of silent halls that would only amplify her thoughts. Carolina's modest apartment in Midtown provided a warm sense of normalcy. Once they arrived, Carolina settled Naomi on the couch, fetched a glass of water, and draped a soft blanket over her shoulders. "I'm here for you," she said gently. Naomi nodded, tears still streaming. "Thank you. I don't know what to do." Carolina sat beside her. "You don't have to decide anything right now. Just rest, breathe. You're pregnant, and that baby's well-being is top priority." Naomi's hand drifted protectively to her belly. She felt a faint flutter in response, and guilt twisted inside her. She had no choice but to remain strong for her child, no matter how devastated she felt. Carolina's phone rang. She glanced at it, then looked at Naomi. "It's Jonathan," she said quietly. "He's calling me." Naomi's stomach clenched. She shook her head vehemently. She didn't want to talk to him yet. Carolina silenced the call. They spent the next several hours in a haze of tears, comforting words, and endless questions. How long? Why now? What would happen next? Eventually, Naomi drifted into a fitful sleep on the couch, one hand on her belly. Dreams tormented her, half-formed images of Jonathan, hospital rooms, and the haunting face of Melissa. By morning, she woke with an ache in her chest that rivaled the physical discomfort of pregnancy. Over the next few days, Naomi avoided Jonathan's calls. He left countless voicemails, expressing remorse, begging her to come home or to at least talk. She couldn't bring herself to face him. The pain ran too deep. She told Carolina she needed more time. On day 3, a persistent knock sounded on Carolina's apartment door. Naomi, curled up on the couch, jolted at the noise. Carolina answered, and Naomi heard a tense exchange before Jonathan stepped into the living room. His posture hunched. He wore casual clothes, rare for him, bandage still on his forehead. His eyes were bloodshot, as though he hadn't slept in days. "Naomi," he began softly. "I just want to see if you're okay. You haven't responded to me, and I was worried." Naomi stood, arms crossed, heart racing. "You were worried now? Where was that concern months ago?" Carolina hovered protectively beside Naomi, glaring at Jonathan. "She doesn't owe you anything right now." Jonathan nodded, swallowing hard. "I know. I'm sorry. But please let's talk privately." Naomi hesitated. Part of her wanted to run, but another part wanted resolution. She glanced at Carolina, who nodded in silent understanding and retreated to the kitchen to give them space. Jonathan took a tentative step closer. "I'm not proud of what I did. I was weak, and I let stress and ambition warp my priorities. But I love you, Naomi. I never wanted to leave you or the baby." She clenched her jaw. "You showed your love by sneaking around with another woman." He ran a hand through his hair, voice trembling. "I know it sounds hollow, but I never stopped loving you. I was just. When you got pregnant, I felt the weight of everything. My business was exploding. Investors demanded more of me. I thought you needed me to be perfect, strong, unstoppable. That's how I rationalized everything, but I realized it was foolish." Naomi's tears threatened to resurface. Part of her wanted to believe him, to hold on to the possibility of salvaging their marriage. Another part screamed that trusting him again was a trap. She turned away, arms folded around her belly as if shielding her child from his words. "I can't just forgive this," she said, her voice unsteady. "You lied to me for months. And with the baby coming, how can I trust you again? I'll do whatever it takes," he said earnestly. "Therapy, counseling, stepping back from my business. I'll prove it to you. Please, just give me a chance." Naomi bit her lip, tears sliding down her cheeks. She thought of their wedding day, the promises they made. Could they rediscover any of that magic after such a betrayal? "I don't know," she whispered. "I need more time." Jonathan nodded, anguish evident. "Take all the time you need. I'll wait." With that, he left, leaving Naomi trembling. She sank onto the couch, exhausted by the mere act of conversation. Carolina emerged, placing a comforting hand on Naomi's shoulder. "You did well. You're allowed to be confused, to take your time. But remember, your health and your babies come first." Naomi wiped her tears, nodding. She had decisions to make, but for now, she only wanted to breathe. And that alone felt like a monumental task. Naomi spent another week at Carolina's apartment, trying to gather the fragments of her life. News of Jonathan's affair had begun to spread, at least among their social circles. Some expressed shock, others admitted they'd suspected something was off. It pained Naomi to know she was the last to truly see the full picture. In that week, her obgyn doctor, Hall, grew concerned about her stress levels. He insisted she come in for a checkup. Carolina accompanied her, worried that Naomi might break down again. As doctor, Hall performed an ultrasound. Naomi stared at the monitor. The baby's heartbeat pounded strong and steady. Tears of relief slipped down her cheeks. This innocent child deserved a mother who was healthy in both body and mind. "Everything looks good physically," Dr. Hall said, wiping the gel from her belly. "But pregnancy is stressful enough without emotional trauma. Do you have a support system? Perhaps therapy?" Naomi nodded, forcing a small smile. "I'm considering it. Thank you." Carolina helped her back into the car. "You're going to be a great mother," she said firmly. "Jonathan's mistakes don't define you." Naomi swallowed. "I'm just not sure if I should try to repair my marriage or end it." Carolina offered a sympathetic shrug. "No one can decide that but you. Therapy might help you figure it out." Naomi exhaled. She never expected to need marriage counseling, yet here she was. Eventually, Naomi agreed to meet Jonathan in a public place, a small cafe near her old neighborhood. She chose the location to ensure neutral ground. Carolina offered to join, but Naomi wanted to do this alone. Seated at a table by the window, Naomi sipped water, half dreading Jonathan's arrival. He entered, scanning the cafe with anxious eyes until he spotted her. He looked thinner, cheeks hollow with worry. Carefully, he took a seat. They were silent for a moment. Naomi noticed the faint scar near his hairline from the accident. It was a tangible mark of the chaos they'd endured. "How have you been?" he asked gently, his voice laced with regret. "How's the baby?" She pressed a hand to her belly. "We're okay, physically, emotionally. I'm taking it day by day." He nodded, gaze dropping to the table. "I'm sorry, Naomi. I know I can't say it enough." She clenched her jaw. "Sorry doesn't erase what you did. I know, but I'd like us to consider counseling professional help. I've already reached out to someone recommended by a colleague, Dr. Elaine Sanders. She specializes in marriage crises. I can set up an appointment if you're willing." Naomi's heartbeat thumped. Part of her wanted to scoff at the idea. Another part realized it might be their only hope. "I'll think about it," she said softly, "but I make no promises." Jonathan's eyes glimmered with cautious hope. "That's all I'm asking." They spoke a bit longer, primarily about logistical matters, bills, upcoming baby needs. Naomi kept her guard up. She refused his offer of a ride, insisting on taking her own car. When she left, she felt the slightest easing of the crushing weight on her chest. She wasn't ready to forgive him, but maybe she was ready to find direction. Just as Naomi thought life couldn't become more complicated, a single phone call shattered her fragile calm. Late one afternoon, she picked up an unknown number to hear a quiet, trembling voice. "Naomi, it's Melissa." Naomi froze. Her gut reaction was to hang up, but something in Melissa's tone halted her. "How did you get my number?" she asked, voice thick with disdain. "From Jonathan's phone a while back," Melissa admitted, sounding both desperate and miserable. "Listen, I'm leaving the city soon. The accident, this whole mess, made me realize how out of control my life was. But I want you to know that Jonathan never told me he wanted to leave you. I wish I could take it all back." Naomi's pulse pounded in her ears. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm truly sorry," Melissa said, voice cracking. "I'm not looking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I just need you to know that he never planned to abandon you. It was my mistake too. I pushed for more, ignoring the fact that I was tearing a family apart." A storm of conflicting emotions raged within Naomi. Part of her felt a twisted sense of relief. Jonathan hadn't planned to abandon her. So perhaps his affair was less about building a new life with Melissa and more about an escape from stress. Another part seethed at how meaningless the distinction was. He still betrayed her trust. And now, in her final weeks of pregnancy, she was left to pick up the pieces. Finally, Naomi closed her eyes, gripping the phone. "Just go," she said, voice trembling. "If you're truly sorry, vanish from our lives." Melissa breathed an unsteady sigh. "I will, I promise." The line clicked dead. Naomi sank onto the nearest chair, overwhelmed. As much as she despised Melissa, the conversation brought a flicker of clarity. Jonathan's betrayal wasn't necessarily born from a desire to replace Naomi, but rather from the cracks in himself, cracks he hadn't been brave enough to face with her. Spurred by a fierce desire to find stability before the baby's arrival, Naomi decided to try therapy with Jonathan. She moved back into the estate's guest room. She couldn't bring herself to share the marital bed yet. Jonathan respected her boundaries, giving her space, but also showing up for every session with Dr. Elaine Sanders. Their first session was tense. Dr. Sanders, a composed woman in her 40s with gentle eyes, guided them to talk about their individual hurts, fears, and hopes. Jonathan confessed he felt inadequate, worried that he couldn't balance fatherhood and his growing business. Naomi unleashed a torrent of betrayal and heartbreak, detailing every suspicion and lonely evening. After each session, Naomi felt drained, but also a tiny bit lighter. The process forced them to communicate honestly, no more secrets or half-truths. Meanwhile, Jonathan took tangible steps to prove his commitment. He pulled out of a few major partnerships and delegated tasks to his business partner, Garrett Reynolds, to reduce his punishing schedule. He wanted to be home more often, to show Naomi and their unborn child that they came first. Naomi noticed these gestures, though she stayed guarded. While she began sleeping in the master bedroom again, she kept a pillow barrier between them as a silent reminder that Jonathan had a long road to earn her full trust. Some nights she'd wake to find his hand resting gently on her belly, tears in his eyes as he felt the baby kick. In those moments, she glimpsed a flicker of the man she fell in love with. By week 35 of her pregnancy, Naomi found herself torn between cautious optimism and lingering resentment. Therapy had helped them talk through many issues, but the memory of betrayal refused to vanish. She'd learned that healing wasn't a single decision, it was a daily choice. One afternoon, Jonathan accompanied Naomi to another prenatal checkup. Dr. Hall performed the ultrasound, and Jonathan held Naomi's hand as they saw their baby's profile on the screen. Naomi turned her head slightly, catching the awe in Jonathan's eyes. She realized how badly he wanted to be a father, how deeply he regretted gambling with their marriage. Afterward, they stopped by a cafe to share a rare, quiet lunch. They discussed nursery plans. Baby names. Jonathan even proposed naming their child after Naomi's father if it was a boy. A warmth spread through Naomi's chest at the notion that Jonathan wanted to honor her family's legacy. Still, the day ended on a somber note. That night, as they prepared for bed, Naomi felt the ghosts of the past lurking in the shadows. She wondered if she'd ever truly be free of them. As Naomi neared her due date, Dr. Hall warned her that stress could potentially lead to complications. Despite therapy, her emotional roller coaster continued. Jonathan tried to be patient, but she sensed his desperation to mend things quickly, an urgency that sometimes clashed with her need to heal at her own pace. One evening, they had a fight when Jonathan came home later than planned. He'd gone out for a business dinner with Garrett, and though he texted Naomi, she still felt a spike of fear that it might all happen again. His remorseful explanation didn't quell her anxiety, and they argued. It ended with Naomi sobbing in the bathroom, locked away while Jonathan pleaded on the other side of the door. The next morning, Jonathan apologized again and again, reminding her he had told her about the dinner in advance. Naomi knew she overreacted, but trust, once shattered, demanded vigilance until it could be rebuilt. They made up over a quiet breakfast, tension still lingering. Through it all, therapy sessions continued. Dr. Sanders reminded them that the path to reconciliation was seldom linear. They pressed on, fueled by love for their unborn child and the flicker of devotion that still lived between them. Late one night, 38 weeks into her pregnancy, Naomi felt the first pang of contractions. A sharp pain rippled across her lower abdomen, followed by another, stronger one. She gripped the edge of the kitchen counter, breath hitching. "Jonathan!" she called, panic threading her voice. He rushed in from the living room, eyes wide. "Is it?" She nodded, gasping through another contraction. "Hospital! Now!" They scrambled to grab the packed overnight bag. Jonathan helped Naomi into the car and sped through the quiet city streets toward Midtown General, the same hospital that had once been a setting of betrayal. The irony didn't escape Naomi as she tried to breathe through the pain. In the maternity ward, nurses guided her into a birthing suite. Dr. Hall arrived soon after, calm and reassuring. Naomi clutched Jonathan's hand as a fresh wave of contractions tore through her. This was it, the moment she had both yearned for and dreaded, the moment that would change everything. Labor lasted 11 hours, each contraction an agonizing test of her limits. Jonathan never left her side, wiping her brow, whispering words of encouragement, tears in his own eyes as he witnessed her struggle. For all their problems, in that vulnerable moment, Naomi felt a tangible bond with him. He was her partner in this birth, if not yet fully healed as her husband. At dawn, Naomi summoned the last of her strength, pushing with everything she had. A shrill cry split the air, echoing in Naomi's ears like the sweetest music she'd ever heard. "Doctor." Hall held up a wriggling, red-faced infant. "It's a boy," he announced, placing the newborn on Naomi's chest. Tears streamed down Naomi's face. Jonathan leaned in, overcome with awe and emotion. Their son's tiny fingers curled around Jonathan's thumb, forging a fresh connection, one that might bridge even the greatest rift. Naomi hardly noticed the flurry of nurses, the hum of monitors. All that mattered was the warm, delicate weight of her baby. Jonathan's trembling hand brushed her hair, his gaze brimming with love. For that fleeting instant, heartbreak and betrayal were eclipsed by a new dawn of hope. They named him Maxwell Turner, after Naomi's paternal grandfather. The first days in the hospital were surreal. Maxwell's every squawk and whimper drew them together, forging an unspoken truce. Jonathan changed diapers clumsily but earnestly, while Naomi attempted breastfeeding with the gentle guidance of the lactation consultant. There were tears of exhaustion, joy, and still lingering pain. Dr. Hall praised Naomi for making it through a healthy delivery despite the emotional turmoil. Naomi thanked him, cradling Maxwell in her arms. Her baby's tiny heartbeat seemed to resonate in her own chest, reminding her that she had a new responsibility that overshadowed every personal grievance. On their final day before discharge, a nurse brought in forms for the birth certificate. Jonathan signed next to Naomi, exchanging a hesitant smile. It felt like a significant step, validating Maxwell's place in the world and reaffirming that, despite the chaos, they were a family. However, Naomi's heart remained guarded. She still woke in the night, haunted by images of Jonathan and Melissa. Trust couldn't be rebuilt just because a baby was born. Yet neither could she deny Jonathan's devotion in these crucial first days. Bringing Maxwell home was another milestone that jarred Naomi. The estate, once so lonely, now felt like a sanctuary filled with new life. She settled into the nursery. Jonathan had prepared. Painted a soft grey with a mobile of clouds and stars, it was both soothing and bittersweet. She recalled the nights she watched him slip away for phone calls, suspecting nothing. How quickly illusions could break. The first week blurred in a haze of nighttime feedings, diaper changes, and postpartum aches. Jonathan was more present than she'd ever seen him, taking on fatherly duties, cooking meals, and effectively halting his business schedule to focus on Naomi and Maxwell. He and Garrett handled urgent matters via a handful of phone calls, but the days of back-to-back meetings were gone, at least temporarily. Naomi appreciated the effort. Often, she found herself gazing at Jonathan, marveling at how fatherhood seemed to soften him, even as her heart still carried scars. Late one evening, after Maxwell finally fell asleep, Jonathan found Naomi in the kitchen, absently brewing tea. He approached slowly. "You should rest." She turned, exhaustion lining her face. "I will. Just letting my mind settle." He dared to place a hand on her shoulder, and she didn't pull away. "I know it's not enough, but I'm grateful you let me back into your life. Even a little. I swear I won't fail you again." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. "Don't make promises you can't keep." But her voice lacked the sharpness of before. A weary acceptance laced her words. She wanted so desperately to believe him. They stood in the kitchen, silent except for the hum of the refrigerator, the hush of possibility weaving between them. Naomi closed her eyes, letting a single tear fall. Whether they could heal from this betrayal fully, only time would tell. Just as Naomi and Jonathan navigated the new normal, outside forces threatened their fragile peace. Tabloids caught wind of Jonathan's accident, rumors swirling about Melissa's involvement. Speculative articles surfaced, questioning whether the Turners' marriage was on the brink of collapse, whether baby Maxwell was enough to keep them together. Carolina texted Naomi screenshots of particularly vicious headlines. Naomi forced herself not to look at them. She had enough to deal with inside her own mind. She didn't need the world's judgment. But one morning, a paparazzo lurking outside the estate managed to snap a photo of Naomi cradling Maxwell by a window. The next day, an article surfaced about the brave wife who fights for her child, peddling half-truths about the affair. Some tabloids twisted the story to imply Naomi was complicit or that she'd known all along. It was vile. Jonathan had the security staff tighten their perimeter, threatening legal action. Still, the intrusion grated on Naomi's nerves, fueling her postpartum anxiety. Therapy sessions with Dr. Sanders now included discussions about setting boundaries to protect their privacy. Over the weeks that followed, the tension ebbed and flowed. There were moments when old wounds reopened, especially if Jonathan's phone buzzed with a late-night text. Naomi would freeze, suspicion flaring, until she confirmed it was just a business alert from Garrett or a routine update from an investor. Yet Jonathan remained unwavering in his efforts. He offered full transparency, sometimes even handing Naomi his phone to show her there was nothing to hide. He ceased all contact with Melissa, who had indeed left the city after her final phone call to Naomi. The result was a cautious thaw in Naomi's heart. The birth of Maxwell had forced them to rebuild their family's foundation from the ground up. Though her trust was bruised, it wasn't entirely broken. One evening, Jonathan lit a few candles in the living room, turning down the lights. He found Naomi in the nursery, rocking Maxwell to sleep. Whispering so as not to disturb the baby, he led her out, leaving Maxwell safe in the crib monitor's watchful eye. Naomi's eyebrows arched in surprise at the flicker of candlelight dancing across the walls. Jonathan guided her to the couch, where a small box rested on the coffee table. "You look tired," he murmured, "but I wanted to give you something." Curiosity mingled with lingering wariness. She sank onto the couch. Jonathan opened the box to reveal a delicate silver necklace. A single charm, a small heart engraved with Maxwell's initials, hung from the chain. "A new beginning," Jonathan said softly. "For us, for Maxwell." Naomi's lips trembled. She gently lifted the necklace, tears pricking her eyes. "It's beautiful." He took it from her hands. "May I?" She nodded. He fastened it around her neck, fingers brushing her collarbone. For a moment, she closed her eyes, letting the warmth of that gesture wash over her. Yes, they had a painful history. Yes, her heart still held scars. But looking at Maxwell's initials on the pendant, she found a fragile resolve to keep trying. In the months that followed, life settled into an uneasy rhythm of progress and setbacks. Naomi and Jonathan continued therapy, now focusing on forging stronger communication, preventing old patterns from re-emerging. Maxwell grew rapidly, from a fragile newborn to a gurgling infant who seemed to bring light wherever he went. Naomi sometimes caught herself smiling at Jonathan's clumsy attempts to feed Maxwell mashed bananas or coax him into giggles. She saw genuine love in his eyes, a devotion that felt real. While the memory of the betrayal never vanished, it softened with each day. Jonathan proved his loyalty. Still, there were nights when Naomi awoke drenched in sweat from nightmares, images of Jonathan and Melissa, the hospital corridor, the stifling sting of betrayal. She'd roll over, finding Jonathan asleep, one hand protectively outstretched as if to shield her. In those moments, she let herself believe they could emerge stronger than before. Carolina remained a vital confidant, providing Naomi with perspective and encouragement. "You're rebuilding," she'd say. "It takes time and courage. I'm proud of you." Jonathan, for his part, occasionally struggled with guilt, questioning if Naomi would ever fully forgive him. Dr. Sanders guided him to accept that true atonement was a patient endeavor. He couldn't rush Naomi's healing. Just when they found a semblance of calm, an unforeseen crisis erupted. Jonathan's business partner, Garrett, discovered financial irregularities in one of their biggest ventures. An investor threatened to sue, claiming mismanagement. Jonathan tried to shield Naomi from the stress, but the tension seeped into the household. He worked late again, fielding calls from lawyers and accountants. Naomi's insecurities flared, triggering painful memories of the past. It felt dangerously reminiscent of the days he'd vanish, fueling her suspicions. One evening, Naomi confronted him, tears brimming. "I can't go back to how it was. If you shut me out now, I'll feel it all over again, the betrayal." Jonathan pulled her into a fierce embrace. "I won't. I swear." He promptly introduced her to the legal team, explaining every detail of the crisis. Though it burdened her with worry, it also reassured her he had nothing to hide. They faced the new challenge together, determined not to let it unravel what they'd rebuilt. Therapy proved to be a cornerstone in their lives. Week after week, they addressed deeper scars, childhood traumas, the ways ambition and fear had shaped them. Naomi unearthed her fear of abandonment, stemming from her father's sudden death years ago, a wound that made Jonathan's betrayal feel like an echo of old losses. Jonathan unearthed a long-standing sense of unworthiness that fueled his drive to be perfect for everyone. Tears were spilled in that therapy office, but each session fortified the foundation of their renewed relationship. They learned to recognize triggers, moments where suspicion or doubt might resurface, and how to handle them with open communication. Naomi noticed a subtle but unmistakable shift in Jonathan's behavior. He no longer reached for his phone during dinner, or, if he had to, he'd explain who was calling and why. He began scheduling regular date nights, simple evenings, watching movies at home, or walks through the local park with Maxwell. Naomi discovered that while wounds might not fade entirely, they could be transformed into cautious gratitude for the second chance they were embracing. Eventually, the legal crisis with the investor simmered down through a negotiated settlement. The tabloids moved on to other scandals, and Melissa Brighton remained a ghost of the past, never reappearing in their lives. By the time Maxwell reached 6 months old, Naomi and Jonathan found themselves in a space that felt strangely normal and yet far from the naive bliss they once had. Their love, battered and tested, had a new depth born of vulnerability. One evening, after putting Maxwell to bed, they lay together on the couch. Jonathan cradled Naomi against him, her head resting on his shoulder. The television played softly in the background, but neither paid much attention. "I'm sorry," Jonathan whispered, "for everything. I don't deserve the grace you've shown me." Naomi's eyes glistened. "You deserve a chance. You're proving yourself every day." They intertwined fingers. Silence spanned a moment, comforting rather than awkward. The house felt warmer than it ever had. "Maybe one day," Naomi said softly, "I'll say I've forgiven you completely. But I'm close, Jonathan. You've been there for Maxwell, and you've shown me you're willing to do the work." His arms tightened around her, voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you. I promise. I'll never forget the lesson I learned. I almost lost everything that mattered." Naomi turned and pressed her lips to his cheek. It wasn't the lightning flash passion of early romance, but it held a steadier, more profound quality, one forged through pain, resilience, and a determination to love again. Time marched on, carrying them through Maxwell's first words, his first halting steps. Each milestone knitted them closer, overshadowing the bitterness of the past. Jonathan restructured his business for a healthier work-life balance, turning down deals that threatened to devour his time. He no longer chased every opportunity at the expense of his family. On Maxwell's first birthday, they threw a small gathering in the backyard. Carolina arrived with balloons and a camera in hand. Even Garrett and Dr. Elaine Sanders were invited, though the latter politely declined, citing professional boundaries. Jonathan grilled while Naomi watched Maxwell grab fistfuls of cake, an image that made her heart swell. A year ago, she had believed her life was perfect, only to discover cracks that nearly destroyed it all. Now, as she observed Jonathan's genuine laughter while chasing Maxwell around, Naomi realized their life wasn't perfect. Perhaps it never was. But it was real, honest, and strong enough to survive heartbreak. They would always carry the memory of betrayal. That scar was a reminder of how quickly trust could be shattered. Yet they chose every day to stand together, forging a love both cautious and fiercely committed. As the sun set on Maxwell's birthday and the last guests trickled out, Jonathan pulled Naomi aside. With Maxwell dozing in her arms, he placed a gentle hand on her cheek, his eyes brimming with gratitude. "You saved me," he whispered. "Saved us." Naomi shook her head. "We saved each other." And in that moment, watching the pastel sky fade above their little family, she felt hope for the future. No matter what trials came next, they had faced the worst and emerged, hearts bruised but not broken, bound by the tiny life in her arms, and a renewed dedication to loving each other despite every imperfection. Thank you for sharing in Naomi Turner's emotionally charged journey, where one critical moment at the hospital unraveled layers of betrayal and heartbreak, yet also sparked a long and challenging road to hope. From secret phone calls to a painful confrontation in the sterile glow of the emergency wing, Naomi's story reminds us that trust is fragile and rebuilding it requires soul-deep honesty, daily commitment, and unwavering strength. If this story captured your heart, resonated with your own struggles, or simply kept you on the edge of your seat, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who might need a boost of courage, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life drama fiction. Together, let's spread stories that honor resilience and redemption. In Naomi's pain and ultimate triumph, we discover that even the deepest wounds can heal one brave step at a time.
The flashbulbs were a volley of silent applause for Ruslan Astor, each pop and sparkle a confirmation of his universe. Tonight, he was the sun around which New York's elite orbited. At his own foundation's annual charity gala, he was untouchable, a titan, sculpted from ambition and bespoke tailoring. When a society reporter asked him about his past, specifically the quiet wife he'd divorced 2 years ago, he laughed. It was a rich, dismissive sound. "Catherine," he mused, leaning into the microphone, "honestly, who some people are just footnotes in the grand narratives of others. She won't be missed." But history has a funny way of rewriting its footnotes, and in just a few moments, a footnote was about to walk in and burn his entire book. The grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel was Ruslan Astor's personal throne room, and tonight it was dressed for a king. Cascading floral arrangements, heavy with the scent of lilies and hubris, dripped from the ceiling. A string quartet played Vivaldi with a practiced, expensive air. Men in tuxedos that cost more than most people's cars conversed in low, powerful murmurs, their words moving markets and shaping city skylines. Their wives, adorned in a constellation of diamonds, laughed delicately, their gazes sharp, constantly calculating social stock. At the center of it all stood Ruslan, tall, with a predator's handsome confidence and silvering temples that suggested wisdom rather than age. He radiated an aura of absolute control. His company, Astor Global Investments, had just posted another record-breaking quarter. He had ruthlessly acquired a rival firm, an assets the financial papers had called both brilliant and brutal. He was on the cover of Forbes not as a subject, but as a specimen of success. Brenda Finch, a journalist from Modern Affluence magazine, whose smile was as sharp as her pen, cornered him near the champagne fountain. Rosalind, another triumph, she began, her recorder already on. The Astor Foundation has outdone itself. You've raised over 10 million tonight alone. Ruslan offered a smile that didn't quite reach his cool grey eyes. It's about giving back, Brenda. We build, we acquire, but we also have a duty to fortify the very society that allows us to thrive. The practiced humility was a shield, and everyone knew it. Speaking of building, Brenda pressed her tone, shifting slightly. You've built an incredible new life post-divorce. No one even seems to remember. What was her name, the quiet one? Ruslan took a slow, deliberate sip of his champagne. He enjoyed this, the public erasure of his past. Catherine Monroe had been a ghost in his life long before she was legally gone. She was the steady, unseen scaffolding that had supported his climb, the one who'd edited his reports, researched his targets, and hosted flawless dinners for clients while he took the credit. She was the one who had sacrificed her own promising career as an archival historian so he could chase his ambitions. She was quiet, yes, but her silence had been a wellspring of his strength. He looked directly at Brenda, a flicker of genuine disdain crossing his features before being polished away. Catherine. He made a show of searching his memory, a cruel piece of theatre for Brenda's benefit. Ah, yes, Catherine. She was suitable for a time. But my life now, my trajectory requires a different caliber of partner. Someone with presence. Someone who matters. Brenda's eyes gleamed. This was gold. So no regrets, no looking back. Ruslan let out a short, barking laugh. Regret what? The quiet, the beige Brenda look around. He gestured expansively at the glittering ballroom, at the titans of industry, who nodded at him with deference. This is my world. I shed dead weight to get here. Some people are just footnotes in the grand narratives of others. She won't be missed. In fact, I guarantee no one in this room has thought about her since she left. He was right. In this gilded cage of power and influence, Catherine Monroe was a forgotten whisper. She had simply vanished. No messy social media posts, no public fight over assets. She had taken a modest settlement, a pittance, readily compared to what she was entitled to, and disappeared. Ruslan had told everyone she'd likely gone back to live with her aging grandmother in some forgotten corner of Pennsylvania, which to him was a fate worse than death. Well, Brenda said, pocketing her recorder, on to bigger and better things then. Always, Ruslan affirmed, clapping a fellow banker on the shoulder. He moved through the room, a conquering hero in his element. He accepted praise, wrote another check for $1 million on a whim, and shared a joke with a senator. He was insulated by his success, wrapped in a cocoon of wealth and power so thick he believed himself invulnerable. The air was thick with the smell of money and expensive perfume. The music swelled. The laughter grew louder. But then a subtle shift occurred near the grand entrance. A change in the atmosphere, a ripple in the placid pond of the party. The uniformed hotel security guards, usually as stoic as statues, suddenly stood straighter. Their eyes darted towards the ornate double doors, a flicker of confusion and alarm in their professional calm. A murmur started at the edges of the room, a low hum that began to cut through the Vivaldi. Ruslan, deep in conversation about leveraged buyouts, noticed it first as an annoyance. A distraction. He glanced over, expecting a late-arriving celebrity, or perhaps a minor uninvited guest, to be discreetly handled. What he saw made the champagne glass in his hand feel suddenly slick. The grand doors were being held open, not by hotel staff, but by two figures who were utterly alien to this environment. They were men, but they seemed carved from a different, sterner reality. They were tall and ramrod straight, dressed in immaculate dark green military uniforms, with gleaming gold epaulettes and polished brass buttons. White gloves, pristine sashes across their chests, and on their heads formal, peaked caps bearing an unfamiliar crest, a silver falcon clutching a key. They weren't security. They weren't performers. They were royal guards. Their faces were impassive, their posture radiating a lethal stillness that made the powerful men in the room seem like soft, preening boys. Between them, a small group of people entered. A woman with a sleek black bob and an intense, focused expression held a large broadcast camera, its red recording light glowing like a malevolent eye. A sound engineer followed a boom mic held aloft. They moved with a quiet, purposeful efficiency that was somehow more intimidating than if they had stormed the place. And then he saw who they were escorting. She stepped through the doorway, and for a heart-stopping moment, Ruslan Astor did not recognize his own ex-wife. The woman who walked into the ballroom was not the Catherine Monroe he had erased. The Catherine he remembered was a creature of soft cardigans and muted tones, her hair often pulled back in a simple functional ponytail. She had a habit of making herself smaller, of folding into herself in rooms full of loud people. Her brilliance a candle she kept shielded from the wind. Her beauty was a quiet academic sort that he had first found charming, then convenient, and finally uninteresting. This woman was a different being entirely. Her hair was styled in elegant sweeping waves that cascaded over one shoulder, the color a rich chestnut that seemed to drink the light. She wore a bespoke evening gown of deep sapphire silk that clung to her form, its severe architectural lines, speaking of Parisian ateliers, not department store racks. Around her neck wasn't the simple gold chain he'd once given her, but a breathtaking necklace of diamonds and sapphires at its center. A large, antique-looking pendant bearing the same falcon and key crest as the guards' caps. But it wasn't the clothes or the jewels that caused the air to leave Ruslan's lungs. It was her posture. Her shoulders were back, her chin held at a regal angle. She walked with a slow, deliberate grace, her eyes sweeping across the stunned faces of the assembled elite. Not with timidity, but with cool, measured assessment. She didn't shrink from their gazes. She commanded them. The quiet candle had become a controlled, brilliant fire. The string quartet faltered, a violin screeching into a dissonant note before falling silent. The hum of conversation died instantly. The silence that fell over the ballroom was absolute, a thick, heavy blanket of collective shock. Every single person, from the waiters to the senator, turned to stare at the procession. Ruslan felt a cold dread, slick and oily, crawl up his spine. His mind, usually so quick and decisive, stuttered. This can't be. It's a mistake. A prank. A hallucination. He searched her face for a sign of the woman. He knew the gentle curve of her smile, the warmth in her brown eyes. The face was the same, but the spirit behind it was utterly transformed. Her eyes, when they finally moved towards him, were not warm. They were calm, clear, and as unyielding as polished stone. His world, so solid and certain just moments before, began to tilt on its axis. The faces of his guests were a blur of gaping mouths and wide eyes. He saw Brenda Finch fumbling for her phone, her journalistic instincts overriding her shock. He saw his business rival Dominic Shaw, a smirk already playing on his lips, savoring the unfolding catastrophe. The camera crew, led by the woman, with the bob fanned out, slightly capturing the scene from multiple angles. The director, for That's What She Must Be, gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to her camera woman, who zoomed in, focusing tightly on Ruslan's face. He could feel the lens on him, a physical pressure. He was no longer the director of this event. He was its unwilling star. The procession did not stop at the edge of the room. It advanced. The royal guards moved with a synchronized rhythmic tread, their polished boots making no sound on the thick carpet, which was somehow more menacing than a heavy stomp. They moved past the champagne fountain, past the bewildered knots of guests, who parted for them as if by an invisible force. They were walking directly towards him. Ruslan's heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of his own making. His throat was dry, the confident, dismissive words he had spoken to Brenda just minutes ago echoed in his skull, each one a nail in his own coffin. She won't be missed, a footnote, dead weight. He felt a primal urge to run to call security, to yell and scream, and make this nightmare stop. But he was frozen, pinned in place by 100 pairs of eyes and the cold, undeniable reality of his ex-wife walking towards him, flanked by soldiers and trailed by a film crew, looking like she owned the very ground he stood on. Catherine stopped about 10 feet away from him. The guards halted in perfect unison, taking up positions slightly behind her, their hands resting formally on the hilts of the ceremonial swords at their waists. They were silent sentinels, their presence a clear and unspoken message. This woman was protected. For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence stretched, becoming more charged and uncomfortable with every passing second. In that silence, Ruslan Astor saw the full, terrifying scope of his miscalculation. He hadn't just divorced a quiet historian. He had discarded something he had never bothered to understand, and now it had returned in a form he couldn't comprehend. Finally, her eyes met his. There was no anger in them, no hatred, no desire for petty vengeance. There was something far more devastating in difference. It was the look one gives to a piece of furniture, a curious relic from a past life that no longer holds any emotional significance. Then she smiled. It was a small, serene, and utterly ruinous smile, and she spoke, her voice clear and steady, carrying across the silent, breathless room. "Ruslan," she said, her tone as smooth and cool as the silk of her gown. "You look surprised." Ruslan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His mind, a finely tuned machine for hostile takeovers and market analysis, was failing its most basic functions. He felt the heat of 100 stares, the collective gaze of his peers, his rivals, his sycophants. He was exposed, a specimen under a microscope. "Catherine!" He finally managed his voice, a hoarse croak that sounded pathetic even to his own ears. "What is this? What is the meaning of this circus?" He gestured wildly at the guards, the cameras. He was trying to project outrage to reclaim control, but it came out as panicked blustering. "A circus." The woman director with the black bob stepped forward, her expression sharp and businesslike. She held up a hand to her camera operator, a silent instruction. "Mr. Astor, my name is Helena Vargas. I'm the director of this circus. We're filming a documentary, The Bloodline Cipher, and we have all the necessary permits to be here." Her voice was calm, clipped, and held an authority that brooked no argument. Ruslan's gaze snapped back to Catherine. "A documentary? What are you talking about? You were a researcher. You catalogued dusty books." The words were meant to be dismissive, to remind her of her place, but they sounded hollow, desperate. Catherine's serene smile didn't waver. "I still am a historian, Ruslan. My field of study has simply become more personal." Before he could respond, Helena Vargas spoke again, her voice clear and precise, ensuring everyone in the vicinity could hear. "Our documentary series chronicles the stories of individuals who, through modern genealogical research and DNA analysis, discover they are the lost heirs to dormant or unrecognized noble and aristocratic lines in Europe. We are here documenting the final chapter of our current subject's story, her reintroduction to a world that never knew she existed." A wave of gasps and frantic whispers rippled through the ballroom. Lost heirs nobility. The concepts were so ludicrously romantic, so out of place in this world of cold, hard cash, that they were utterly captivating. Brenda Finch was now openly recording on her phone, her face alight with the kind of journalistic ecstasy that only comes once in a career. Ruslan felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. He stared at the falcon and key crest on the pendant around Catherine's neck, then at the identical insignia on the guards' uniforms. It was real. This wasn't a prank. This was a meticulously orchestrated event. "This is insane," he stammered, looking around for an ally, for someone to share in his disbelief. but all he saw were faces filled with avid curiosity. Dominic Shaw was now leaning against a pillar, arms crossed, a look of pure, unadulterated joy on his face. The truth often seems insane to those who have built their lives on convenient fictions, Catherine said softly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the murmurs like a scalpel. You saw me as a footnote, Ruslan, an uninteresting detail in your biography. It never occurred to you to read the page I was on, did it? She took a step closer. The guards mirrored her movement, a silent, intimidating shadow. My grandmother, whom you so often dismissed as a senile old woman from the sticks, was not just a refugee from the war. She was Baroness Anneliese von Strauss of the Principality of Serafina. She fled with nothing but her life and her infant daughter, my mother, after her family was dispossessed. She hid her identity, her history, all to keep her child safe. She lived a quiet life, terrified that the past would catch up to her. The story unfolded, each word a hammer blow to Ruslan's reality. The Principality of Serafina, a small sovereign nation tucked between Austria and Switzerland, known for its fierce independence, its banking privacy, and its ancient nobility. A place so exclusive it made Monaco look like a public park. When my grandmother passed away last year, Catherine continued, her eyes locked on his, she left me a letter and a locket. Inside was a key, not a physical key, but a cipher that unlocked our family's history, which she had painstakingly documented. With the help of the Serafinan Royal Archives and a team of genealogists, we confirmed it all. The titles of my family were never extinguished, merely dormant. As her sole, living, legitimate descendant, the title passes to me. Helena Vargas, the director, stepped forward once more, providing the coup de grace. Allow me to introduce you all. She announced, her voice ringing with theatrical flair. To Baroness Catherine von Strauss of Serafina. The name hung in the air, electric and impossible. Baroness. The word was a thunderclap in the silent ballroom. Ruslan felt his knees weaken. The woman he had called dead weight was a baroness. The ex-wife he had assured everyone wouldn't be missed was now titled Nobility, standing in the center of his gala, flanked by royal guards, with a film crew broadcasting his humiliation. He looked at her, truly, looked at her and saw the truth. This wasn't just about a title. This was about identity. He had tried to strip her of one to make her nothing more than Mrs. Astor, a pale reflection of his own glory, and in his absence she had found an identity far older, far more resonant, and infinitely more powerful than any he could ever offer. Why? He whispered the question, raw and pathetic. Why do this here in front of everyone? Catherine's expression softened for the first time, but not with pity. It was with a kind of clinical closure. Because you needed an audience, Ruslan, she said, her voice dropping so only he could hear it. You built your entire world on the perceptions of others. Your strength is derived from their applause. I thought it was only fitting that your education be conducted in front of the same crowd. She glanced around the room at the stunned faces. You said I wouldn't be missed. I just wanted to see for myself if you were right. With that, she turned her back on him. Her dismissal was more profound than any insult. He was no longer part of the conversation. He was the footnote now. Miss Vargas, Catherine said to the director, her voice once again clear and public. I believe we have what we came for. Shall we? Helena Vargas nodded. Cut, she said to her camera operator. That's a wrap on this location. And as the guests stood frozen, a sea of black ties and stunned jewels, Baroness Catherine von Strauss of Serafina, flanked by her guards, turned and walked out of the ballroom, leaving Ruslan Astor alone in the ruins of his perfect night, the silent echo of his own arrogance ringing in his ears. To the stunned onlookers at the gala, Catherine's transformation was a magical, instantaneous event. A Cinderella story in reverse, where the princess sheds her rags to reveal the royalty that was always there. But for Catherine, the journey from the shadows of her marriage to the spotlight in that ballroom was a slow, painful excavation of a life buried alive. Her marriage to Ruslan Astor had begun with what she'd mistaken for love. He was dazzling ambitious and saw in her quiet intelligence a perfect complement to his own flashy brilliance. She was completing her PhD in European history, specializing in the archival of noble estates. He called her his secret weapon charmingly at first. He would bring home complex financial reports, and she, with her historian's mind trained to find patterns in chaos, would help him distill strategies and identify vulnerabilities in his targets. The first crack appeared during a dinner party 2 years into their marriage. Ruslan was holding court, explaining his latest masterstroke, a complex deal involving a German manufacturing dynasty. Catherine listened, a small, proud smile on her face as he recounted the breakthrough moment, the discovery of a clause in a 19th century family charter that gave him the leverage he needed. It was a discovery she had made after spending weeks in a dusty university library, poring over obscure German texts for him. She had excitedly explained it to him over coffee one morning. Now he told the story as his own, a moment of solitary genius. When a guest asked him how he'd even thought to look there, he'd laughed and said, "Sometimes you just have to have a feel for history." He never once glanced her way. That night she confronted him, not with anger, but with a hurt confusion. "Ruslan, that was my research." He had looked at her, genuinely perplexed by her complaint. "And we're a team, aren't we? Your success is my success." But he meant it as a one-way street. He began to call her research our hobby and her shelved dissertation a pastime. He subtly, systematically devalued her world until it seemed insignificant even to her. He convinced her to abandon her PhD. "You're a genius, Kate. You don't need a piece of paper to prove it," framing it as a liberation when it was truly an isolation. The emotional neglect was a slow poison. He was a man who lived for the audience. At home with the curtains drawn, she barely existed. He would be on the phone pacing electric with energy and then hang up, and the light within him would extinguish. He would look at her sitting on the sofa, a book in her lap, and his eyes would slide right past her as if she were a piece of furniture he'd grown tired of. The breaking point was quiet and mundane. He was being honored at another awards dinner, and she had a terrible flu. She begged him to stay, her voice weak. "Ruslan, please, I feel awful." He had paused while putting on his cufflinks, looked at her in the mirror and said, "I have to be there. It's important for us." He kissed her forehead, a cold, perfunctory gesture, and left. Lying in bed, shivering with fever, she realized the us he spoke of was not a partnership. It was a corporation, and he was the CEO, and she was an asset whose depreciation had begun to exceed her value. She left a month later. Her lawyer had urged her to fight for her share of the massive wealth she had helped build. But Catherine wanted no part of it. Taking his money felt like an admission that her time with him had a price. She wanted her freedom, not a severance package. She took only what she'd come with and a small lump sum settlement that would allow her to start over without panic. She moved to a small town in rural Pennsylvania to care for her ailing grandmother, Annalise, the woman Ruslan had always referred to with casual condescension. It was in that quiet house, filled with the scent of old books and dried lavender, that Catherine began to find herself again. Annalise, her mind still sharp despite her physical frailty, never spoke of the past. But one rainy afternoon, as Catherine was organizing a dusty trunk in the attic, she found it a small, velvet-lined box. Inside was a heavy, tarnished silver locket on a chain. It wasn't beautiful, but it felt important. It wouldn't open. She took it downstairs to her grandmother. Annalise's eyes, usually clouded with age, cleared with a sudden, sharp recognition. Her hand trembled as she reached for it. "Mein Falke," She whispered a German phrase Catherine had never heard her use. My falcon. Over the next few weeks, as if the locket had unlocked a door in her mind, Anneliese began to tell her story. She spoke of a castle in the mountains of a crest, with a falcon, and a key of a title Baroness von Strauss that she had buried for over 70 years. She told of fleeing the Anschluss in Austria, her family targeted not for their religion, but for their vocal opposition and their ancient sovereign allegiances to the then neutral Principality of Serafina. Her husband had been killed. She had escaped with her baby Catherine's mother and a few hidden treasures, making her way to America with the help of a refugee network. She had lived in fear her entire life, convinced that acknowledging her past would bring danger to her family. To be noble is to be a target, she'd said, her voice thin. Here I was, just Anna the baker. I was safe. You were safe. After Anneliese passed away peacefully in her sleep, Catherine found the key to the locket taped to the back of an old photograph. Inside wasn't a picture, but a tiny, intricately folded piece of paper. On it was a sequence of numbers and letters, a cipher. Tucked away with her grandmother's will was a letter. It instructed Catherine to contact a specific solicitor's office in Zurich and to give them the cipher. They will know what it means, the letter read. It is your birthright, Katerina. Do not let them forget us. Grief-stricken, but driven by a new burning curiosity, Catherine followed the instructions. The Zurich solicitor was discreet and incredibly efficient. The cipher corresponded to a dormant vault containing family records, letters of patent from the Prince of Serafina, and proof of their lineage dating back to the 15th century. He connected her with the royal archives in Serafina. What followed was 6 months of painstaking, thrilling work, genealogical verification, DNA testing, that matched hers to distant cousins in the Serafina nobility and historical cross-referencing. It was the most important archival project of her life, and it was her own. As her identity was being officially restored by the Serafinan authorities, she received an email from a documentary producer, Helena Vargas. The Royal Archives protective of the Principality's image had alerted her to this incredible story. Helena wanted to document Catherine's journey. At first, Catherine refused. She didn't want the publicity, but then Helena said something that struck a chord. This isn't just your story, it's your grandmother's. It's a story about a woman who sacrificed her identity for her child's safety. Now you have the power to restore that identity, to honor her. Hiding in the shadows is what your enemies would have wanted. Stepping into the light is a victory. And as she thought about it, she realized Helena was right. It was a victory, and there was one person in the world who needed to witness it. A man who dealt in public perception, who had publicly erased her. She thought of Ruslan's smug face, of his dismissive words. A plan began to form, not of petty revenge, but of poetic justice. She told Helena about the Astor Foundation Gala. He's being honored, she said. It's his coronation. He will be at the height of his power, surrounded by everyone whose opinion he values. Helena Vargas's eyes had lit up. Oh, that's cinematic, she'd breathed. That's the final scene. So they planned it meticulously. The bespoke gown, the family jewels flown in from a vault in Zurich, the quiet arrangement with the Serafinan consulate for a formal royal guard escort. Every detail was designed not to create a scene, but to make a statement of fact history and undeniable truth delivered on the very stage where Ruslan Astor performed his fictions. It wasn't about hurting him. It was about showing him and the world he curated exactly what and who he had thrown away. The moment Catherine walked out of that ballroom, the solid ground beneath Ruslan Astor's feet turned to quicksand. The immediate aftermath was a cacophony of camera flashes and shouted questions. Mr. Astor, is it true? Was your ex-wife a secret baroness? Did you know about her noble heritage? What's your comment on her documentary? He stumbled backwards, his face pale, muttering, No comment. As his personal security team, looking flustered and useless, formed a circle around him and hustled him towards a side exit. He escaped his own party, like a criminal, the sound of Brenda Finch's voice yelling, "Ruslan! He said you wouldn't miss her. He said she was a footnote," chasing him down the hall. The fallout was not a storm, it was a contagion. It spread through the digital world with blistering speed. By the time Ruslan reached his sterile Park Avenue penthouse, the first articles were already online. Forbesdom, the Baroness and the banker Asta Gala, rocked by shocking revelation. Vanity Fair. Wall Street's footnote is actually European royalty. Videos shot on guests' phones were going viral, grainy clips of Catherine's regal entrance and Ruslan's slack-jawed disbelief. The narrative he had so carefully constructed for 2 decades, that of the infallible self-made titan, was shattered overnight. The story was too good, too deliciously ironic. He wasn't the hero anymore. He was the villain of a fairy tale, the arrogant fool who cast out the hidden princess. The next morning, the real damage began. The stock for Astor Global Investments opened down 7%. It wasn't a catastrophic drop, but it was a clear signal of market jitters. Wall Street runs on confidence, and the image of Ruslan Astor being so thoroughly publicly blindsided had shaken that confidence to its core. If he could be so ignorant about the person he slept next to for a decade, what else was he ignorant about? What other footnotes had he missed in his due diligence? His phone, usually a conduit of power, became an instrument of torture. Calls from his board members were terse and demanding. "Ruslan, we need to get ahead of this. It's a perception problem. It's a personal matter," Ruslan had roared into the phone at his chairman of the board, a man he'd known for 30 years. It stopped being personal the moment she walked in with a camera crew and uniformed soldiers. "Greg," the chairman had replied coldly, "your brand is our brand, and right now your brand is clueless elitist." His rival, Dominic Shaw, twisted the knife with glee. He gave an anonymous quote to a major financial journal. "In our business, you're paid to know things. You're paid to see value where others don't. When a man has a priceless asset in his own home and mistakes it for junk, it makes you question his eye for every other investment he's ever made." Everyone knew who it was from. Humiliation burned in Ruslan's gut, hot and acidic. He tried to fight back to control the narrative. He hired a crisis PR firm, a team of expensive sharks who specialized in reputation management. Their advice was immediate and unanimous: humility and apology. "You need to issue a statement," the lead publicist, a stern woman named Ms. Evans, instructed him. "You congratulate her. You say you were unaware of her incredible heritage, but you wish her nothing but the best. You frame it as a wonderful, surprising story. Apologize. Congratulate her." Ruslan scoffed, pacing his office. "She ambushed me. She tried to destroy me." "Mr. Astor," Ms. Evans said patiently, "right now the world sees a powerful man who belittled his ex-wife only to find out she's a baroness. The only way to combat that image is to not be that man. You must appear gracious. You must look like you're happy for her." Against every fiber of his being, he agreed. They drafted a statement, a masterpiece of corporate insincerity, and released it. The public's reaction was lukewarm at best. The comments on social media were brutal. "He's only happy for her now that she's a baroness. Damage control. He didn't want her when she was just a brilliant historian." He tried calling Catherine. He wanted to scream at her to demand an explanation, to understand the mechanics of his own downfall. But her old number was disconnected. He had no other way to reach her. He was walled off, left to stew in the consequences of her perfectly executed strike. The whispers followed him everywhere. In the hushed halls of his company, he saw employees go silent and stare at their screens as he passed. At his private club, conversations would stop when he entered the room. He was no longer a subject of admiration. He was an object of gossip, a cautionary tale, a $1 billion deal to acquire a tech firm in Germany, a deal he had been cultivating for a year, suddenly went cold. The German patriarch, a stickler for tradition and honor, sent a curt message through his lawyers. We have decided to pursue other opportunities. The implication was clear. Ruslan became obsessed. He spent hours online searching for news about her. He learned the name of the documentary, The Bloodline Cipher, and that it was scheduled to air in 3 months on a major streaming platform. He read articles about the Principality of Serafina, its immense quiet wealth, its deep respect for history and culture. He saw paparazzi photos of Catherine in Zurich, looking poised and elegant as she entered a private bank flanked by her guards. She was meeting with the very people he had always courted. He was trapped in a prison of his own making. The world he had built was based on an image, and that image was now a caricature. He had flown close to the sun, and the ghost he thought he'd left on the ground had turned out to be the sun itself, and its light was burning his wings to ash. In his solitude in the dead of night, the same thought echoed in his head, a tormenting refrain he had possessed, a treasure, a real one, not of money or title, but of substance and brilliance. And in his arrogance he had thrown it away like garbage, and the world would never let him forget it. While Ruslan's world shrank into a vortex of scandal and whispers, Catherine's expanded into a realm of history purpose and breathtaking alpine light. 2 weeks after the gala, she landed at a private airfield outside Vaduz before taking a chauffeured car across the border into the Principality of Serafina. The film crew followed at a discreet distance, capturing her first moments in the land of her ancestors. Serafina was not the ostentatious playground of Monaco. It was a place of deep, understated grandeur. The car wound its way through valleys of impossible green, past medieval villages where slate-roofed houses clustered around ancient church spires. The air was crisp and clean, scented with pine and snowmelt. Towering over it all were the jagged, majestic peaks of the Alps, silent witnesses to centuries of history. Her title, Baroness von Strauss, was not merely a social ornament here, it was a legacy of responsibility. The von Strauss family had been the traditional keepers of the National Archives and the Royal Art Collection for over 300 years. It was a role of immense cultural trust. Her great-grandfather had been a celebrated historian who had protected the nation's treasures from Nazi plunderers during the war. Her grandmother, in her own way, had protected the bloodline itself. She was met not by fawning courtiers, but by a stoic, silver-haired man named Dr. Alaric Weber, the current Director General of the Serafina National Museums. He was in his late 70s, with eyes that held the patient wisdom of someone who deals in centuries, not quarters. He greeted her with a formal, respectful bow. "Baroness von Strauss," he said, his German-accented English precise. "Welcome home. We have been waiting for you for a long time." There was no palace waiting for her, but something far better. Her ancestral home, Strauss Manor, had been absorbed by the state decades ago and converted into a research institute and repository. Under Serafinian law, with the restoration of her title, a portion of the estate was returned to her custodianship. She was given a wing of beautifully restored apartments within the manor, overlooking a valley that swept down to a glacial lake. Her inheritance wasn't a chest of gold, but a set of keys. Keys to climate-controlled vaults, to archives filled with vellum manuscripts, to restoration laboratories, and to a library that smelled of aging paper and beeswax. It was the home she had unknowingly been searching for her entire life. Dr. Weber became her mentor, guiding her through the vast collections. He showed her the von Strauss family ledgers, their meticulous handwriting detailing every acquisition and preservation effort. He unrolled royal charters, bearing the signatures of princes long dead. He showed her paintings by old masters that had been hidden in salt mines, during times of war, saved by the cunning of her ancestors. This was where she thrived. The quiet academic woman Ruslan had tried to extinguish was reborn. She spent her days covered in archival dust, her mind electric with discovery. She used her PhD-level training to identify misattributed artworks, to translate forgotten correspondence between Seraphinan royalty and the philosophers of the Enlightenment, and to develop a plan to digitize the entire archive for future generations. The documentary crew captured her transformation. They filmed her carefully, handling a 16th century illuminated manuscript, her face glowing with a passion Ruslan had never seen. They filmed her in deep conversation with art restorers discussing pigment chemistry. They filmed her walking the mountain trails behind the manor. Her posture strong, her gaze clear, breathing the free air of her homeland. One afternoon, Helena Vargas sat with her in the manor's library for an interview. "Some might see what you did at that gala as an act of revenge," Helena said, her question pointed, but not unkind. Catherine looked up from a delicate silver music box. She had been examining a piece that had belonged to her grandmother. "When I was with Ruslan," she began slowly, "I felt like a ghost. My passions, my skills, my history, it was all invisible. When I discovered who I was, who my family was, it was like finding a map to my own soul. What I did at the gala wasn't about hurting him, it was about becoming visible." She wound the key on the music box. A delicate, haunting Brahms lullaby filled the quiet room. Ruslan lives in a world of value, stock value, market value, social value. He measures everything. But he has no concept of worth, she continued. The worth of history, of duty, of identity. My grandmother gave up her title to survive, but she never gave up her worth. This, she gestured around the library at the centuries of accumulated knowledge. This is the true inheritance. It's not the title or the land, it's the purpose. She learned that the von Strauss title came with a seat on the Cultural Heritage Board, a position that advised the reigning Prince of Serafina. She attended her first meeting in the capital, dressed not in a glamorous gown, but in a simple, elegant business suit. She was nervous, but when she began to speak about her proposals for the archives, her voice was steady and sure. She wasn't Catherine Monroe, the ex-wife, or even Baroness von Strauss, the curiosity. She was a historian, an expert in her field, and the other board members, seasoned academics, diplomats, and aristocrats, listened with genuine respect. She was building a new life, not on the ashes of her old one, but from the deep, solid bedrock of her own history. The irony was not lost on her. Ruslan had tried to turn her into a footnote, and in doing so, had propelled her into becoming a vital chapter in a history book far grander than any he could ever write. Her victory wasn't the moment of his humiliation at the gala. It was here in the quiet, meaningful work of honoring her past and building her future. 1 year later. The documentary, The Bloodline Cipher, had been a spectacular success. It won awards, praised by critics for its powerful narrative of discovery and reclamation. Catherine Monroe, now professionally known as Baroness von Strauss, became an overnight icon for a certain kind of quiet strength. She was the woman who had refused to be erased. In Serafina, the von Strauss project, as it was now called, was her singular focus. She had secured international funding to build a new, state-of-the-art wing for the National Museum, dedicated to displaying artifacts of Seraphinan history that had been in storage for decades. She worked tirelessly, her life a fulfilling blend of academic rigor and public duty. She gave lectures, oversaw restorations, and spent her evenings in her quiet apartment in the manor, sometimes reading, sometimes simply watching the moon rise over the Alps. She was at peace. One crisp autumn afternoon, she was in a cafe in the capital, reviewing architectural plans, when she glanced at an international newspaper left on an adjacent table. A small article on the business page caught her eye. The headline read, Astor Global downsizes founder Ruslan Astor to step away from CEO role. The article detailed the steady decline of the company over the past year. It cited a crisis of investor confidence and a failure to secure key international partnerships. The disastrous German deal was mentioned as the turning point. Ruslan Astor, it said, would be transitioning to a senior advisory role, corporate jargon for being pushed out of his own company. He was selling his Park Avenue penthouse. The Astor Foundation, once the jewel of New York philanthropy, was being quietly absorbed by a larger charity. Catherine read the words without triumph, without a shred of malice. She felt a profound, quiet sense of closure. His empire, built on the shifting sands of image and public perception, had crumbled when the image was cracked. His world was loud, and she had silenced it with a single irrefutable truth. Thousands of miles away, Ruslan Astor sat in a borrowed office, a small, sterile space, with none of the grandeur he was used to. The bespoke suits felt hollow, the expensive watch on his wrist, a mockery of the time he had lost. His phone rarely rang. The invitations had stopped coming. He was a social leper. Dominic Shaw had successfully orchestrated a boardroom coup, positioning himself as the stable, reliable successor who could repair the company's image. He was no longer the king. He was a ghost in the world he had built, haunted by the memory of a sapphire gown and a ruinous smile. He would sometimes see her face on the news or in a magazine, christening a new museum wing meeting with dignitaries, her expression serene and confident. He would look at the woman on the screen and feel a pang of something more painful than hatred. It was a phantom limb of regret for a life he could have had a partner he had been too blind to see. He had wanted a woman with presence, and he had discarded the one woman whose presence could command a room without saying a word. The true irony, he finally understood, was that he had been the one living the quiet beige life. A life of repetitive deals, shallow conversations, and a desperate need for applause. Catherine had been the one with the deep, rich, technicolor inner world, a world of history and meaning he had never bothered to enter. The final scene of the story belongs not to him, but to her. Catherine stood on a balcony overlooking the new museum wing on its opening night. The Prince of Serafina stood beside her. Below, a crowd of distinguished guests mingled their faces, illuminated by the warm lights. The air buzzed with cultured conversation and the clinking of glasses. Helena Vargas was there, no longer a director, but a friend raising a glass to her from the crowd. A young reporter from a European arts journal approached her. "Baroness," the reporter asked, "your story is an inspiration. To go from obscurity to this. What do you say to people who feel invisible, who feel like footnotes in someone else's story?" Catherine looked out at the mountains, their peaks dark against the star-dusted sky. She thought of her grandmother's sacrifice, of Ruslan's dismissive laugh, of the long, quiet path that had led her here. "I would tell them that a footnote is still part of the book," she said, her voice clear and calm. "It holds a piece of the truth. Sometimes all you have to do is find the courage to turn the page and read it aloud. You might discover that your little note wasn't a footnote at all. It was the title of a much better story waiting to be told." She had not just reclaimed her name. She had become the author of her own life. And Ruslan Astor, the man who wrote grand narratives, was a forgotten sentence in her far more interesting tale. So what happens when the life you tried to erase writes itself back into history with royal authority? The story of Catherine Monroe, now Baroness von Strauss, isn't just about revenge. It's a powerful testament to the fact that your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to see it. Ruslan Astor thought he was the main character, but he was just the catalyst for a much greater story. It's a reminder that the quietest people often have the richest inner worlds, and that history, whether personal or royal, has a powerful way of demanding its due. Some people build empires of glass and steel, others reclaim legacies carved in stone. What did you think of Catherine's ultimate power move? Was it perfect justice or a step too far? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of unforeseen triumphs and poetic justice, please hit that like button, share this video with someone who would love it, and make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story.